So that brings us to today's city, Philadelphia. This is the youngest of the cities. It's also one of the smallest. When you look at verse 8, God says to them there, you have a little bit of power. You don't have a lot to work with. You don't have a lot of resources. You don't have a lot of people. You don't have a lot of strength with which to work for. But he says, I've given you an open door. I've given you a ministry here nonetheless. And this message to this church is one of the positive ones. There's two churches that there was nothing negative said about them. Only 2 out of the 7. Smyrna and Philadelphia. And Jesus said to Philadelphia, I've given you a mission. I want you to just be faithful to the mission. And I don't really have anything negative to say to you right now. I just want you to be faithful to the mission that I've given you. And this church that was small, had very little going for it, God said, I've given you some open doors and some opportunities. Now this church followed after the city, just like all of these churches did, right? They all, in some degree or another, followed after the culture of the city that they were found in. Just like last week we saw Sardis followed after the city. They got lazy and lax, and there were threats to their spirituality. They were spiritually dead, Jesus said, because they followed the city. Well, Philadelphia followed the city as well. It's a really fascinating story about this city and how it was built. I've got a couple of pictures that we'll throw up on the screen here. And Chuck, you can just kind of cycle through those pictures. Give it 10 or 20 seconds on each one. And you'll be able to see some of the ruins of this city. That's a particularly interesting one because you can see a section of the roof of that city has just come collapsing straight down and is now sitting on the ground. Do you see it? On the right side of the screen, that's a portion of the roof there that's just sitting right down on the foundation of that city. This city was founded by Attalus II, who was the king of Pergamum. Now you'll remember when we talked about Pergamum a couple of cities back. Pergamum was a center of culture. It was a place where they were famous for their dyed wool, their leather work, their clothing, and all of these different arts, as well as performing arts, this city was famous for. So this city that was rich in arts was founded by Attalus and a group of colonists that he took from the city of Pergamum. They moved over and they planted this city here in Philadelphia. The Greek word Philadelphia is from 2 Greek words. Phileo, which means love, and Delphos, which means brother. So this name of this city is actually brotherly love. And that's what our Philadelphia on the eastern side of Pennsylvania is as well. It's called the city of brotherly love because that's what the word actually means in the original Greek. It was given this name particularly because of its founder, Attalus II. You see, Attalus II had an older brother. How many of you got an older sibling? Brother, sister? How many of you would say you love them with all your heart? Right? That's right. Well, Attalus had an older brother that he loved with all his heart. His name was Eumenes. Eumenes was the king at the time, and Attalus just so appreciated him. Attalus loved him so much that it actually became part of his name. His name literally became Attalus II, Philadelphia, the lover of his brother. And there's a couple of stories from history that kind of give us a little bit of an insight into the kind of love that Attalus had for his brother. In the first instance, Eumenes was off on some duties in Greece, and rumor had gotten back to Attalus that Eumenes had been killed. And so Attalus, the proper protocol was Attalus would take the throne, he would assume control in his brother's stead of the kingship of the region, and he did so. Lo and behold, Eumenes shows up later from Greece on a return from his trip, and it turns out that the rumor was completely false. Now, Attalus is in a position, he's now established his authority, he's established his kingship, following after his brother, but now his brother's back. What's he going to do? Is the little brother who's had a taste of this glory and this power, is he going to give it back? And Attalus did, because he so respected and loved and honored his brother that he gave the crown and the throne right back to him. A little bit later, the Roman authorities wanted to change leadership. They wanted to go a new direction. And so they approached Attalus and they said, we'd like you, rather than your brother, to be king. Well, Imagine that. They are the rulers of the region at the time. And so when the political authorities come along and say, hey, we want you as our guy, we want Eumenes to move on, and you're the new guy, it would be very easy to say, okay, yeah, I can buy that, I'll take it. But instead of accepting that offer, he rejected that offer and he threw his allegiance to his older brother Eumenes. They had a wonderful relationship that was built on loyalty and built on love and honor. And so this city was built on love and honor by the king who modeled that before his people on a regular basis toward his brother. Love and honor, loyalty. That's what this city was founded on. And in this city, Jesus says here, I put before you an open door, which no one can shut. And just in the verse before that, he said to them, I am the one who opens doors. I am the one who closes doors. If I open a door, nobody can shut it. And if I close a door, nobody can open it. And so to this church, what he's saying is, I've given you an open door. I want you to move forward into that open door that I've given you. And there are certain closed doors that are not available to you. I want you to leave those alone. And that's the message to this church in this city of Philadelphia. Well, what was the open door? The open door looked very similar to the open door that this city had. So that's our sticky statement for today. We'll throw that up there. You try every door. Take the open ones and leave the closed ones behind. That's a big challenge for us, right? Because sometimes when we come up against a closed door, we want to try and jimmy the lock, right? Or just pry it a little bit, maybe force it open, lean our shoulder into it a little bit. Isn't that how we often approach closed doors? It's often how we'll approach people or circumstances that are before us that are just shut down to us. We'll want to just try and leverage a little power and authority there to make it open. And we think, oh, if I just try a little bit harder, if I just use my best thinking or my best tactics, I can get a crack in this door, right? God would say, no, leave those doors shut. If I've closed it, nobody can open it. But then there's doors that are standing wide open, and sometimes we come to them and we think, am I supposed to go through it? Is it the right door? How do I go through it? And Jesus just wants us to walk through the door. If he's opened it, it will remain open, and it's meant for us to go through. Well, this city, Philadelphia, founded by Attalus, around the year 159 to 138. So about 150 years before Jesus would be born, this city was founded. And it was founded for a very specific reason. It was planted right at the intersection, right at the gateway of three major regions here in this Asia Minor area. It was planted right at the intersection of Lydia, Mysia, and Phrygia. And so, basically what you had is you had three kingdoms, so to speak, three cultures. And this church was planted right in the corner, this city was planted right in the corner of all three of these. And it was planted for a specific purpose. Attalus gathered his group of people and took it over and planted this city to be a missionary outpost to spread the Greek culture and the Greek language. So in other words, they knew that their culture and that their language had a lot of good, and they didn't want to hold it and keep it all to themselves. So they started this city right at a doorway to some other regions that they could then use that as a launching point to share that culture with those other cultures. So successful were they that by the year 19, historians tell us, those other cultures had completely lost their own languages. So within 150 years of this city being established, their goal was accomplished, and Greek became the language of those other cultures, and they got rid of their own languages. So that led me to a thought this week. When I learned that, I thought, how would you go about taking a culture and a language and imprinting it or sharing it with a completely foreign culture and foreign language? I think that's a good question to ask ourselves. We live in a pretty Cool place, right? Ohio, we've got the Ohio State University, right? National champions, right? We've got Buckeye cookies, right? We've got, somebody in the first service said wedding soup. We've got wedding soup. When I asked this question in the first service, they said I'd take a pot of wedding soup over and I'd sit down and have a dinner. I said, that's a great example. Because when I went to school in Mississippi, the rest of the world doesn't even know what wedding soup is. And I got down there to Mississippi and nobody had ever heard of wedding soup, and I loved wedding soup. And then there came a day where I kind of had a hankering for wedding soup and I couldn't find it anywhere. And then finally, one of the grocery stores down there in the South started selling it. Those little plastic cups, that you kind of peel the top off and stick it in the microwave, and a minute and a half later it's done. Perfect for a seminary bachelor, right? Well, you can imagine what I did, right? It was one of the first things I did when I found that wedding soup, and no one had ever heard of it before. I got a couple of those little plastic containers, and I took them over to my friends' houses, and I shared a cup of wedding soup with them, right? I said, you got to try this. It's really good stuff. I can't believe you've never heard of this. So here's the question I'm going to lay out to you. This isn't rhetorical. I'm looking for your feedback. How would we go about taking our Ohio culture and our Ohio language to an area that is completely foreign and sharing that culture with them? What's some of the first things we would do? Okay, at this point it's going to take us a little bit longer than it took them. You've got to have an idea and a direction. You're brand new, you're just planted in this foreign kingdom. You've got to share your Ohio culture with them.
You have to bring it with love.
You have to bring it with love, that's good. Yeah.
Make a pot of wedding soup.
Make a pot of wedding soup, that's right, and take it over, yeah. You got to share it with them, right? And not just explain it. I mean, you can explain wedding soup all day, but when you start to explain it, they kind of get grossed out. I've tried it. They're like, there's all that in it, really? But when you share it with them, they realize how good it is, right?
Freeze a pan of snow.
So, I'm sorry?
Freeze a pan of snow.
Freeze a pan of snow. They're going to take some snow to share with them.
Tell them about the sports teams.
Yeah, there you go. And I want to key in on the first thing you said, tell them about. How are you going to go about doing that? Particularly the tell them about. I mean, you're in a brand new area. There's going to be a language barrier, right? How are you going to get over that language barrier?
Pictures.
What's the first? Pictures, good. Pictures, object lessons, right? You're going to take something like this to them and you're going to say, what's this word in your language? And this is what it is in my language, water bottle, right? But there's something you're going to have to do even before you can get to that point, to even have somebody to talk to, right? What are you going to have to do? Yeah, and I was even thinking a step before. Who are you going to talk to? How are you going to bridge that gap? You're a stranger in a strange land. Who are you going to talk to? How are you going to find somebody to talk to? Facebook. That's going to be really tough.
You go to a church.
Okay, yeah, you go anywhere where there's people, right? Now, you walk in there, you can't speak their language. How are you going to interact with them? You're going to look for somebody who looks open, right? A smile. You're going to smile at them, yes, and if they smile back, maybe this is a person I can talk to. And then when you open your mouth and you say O-H-I-O, if they don't run screaming, then maybe you've got somebody that you can talk to, right? But you're going to have to find open people, right? You're going to have to go where they are. You're going to have to engage them in ways that can bridge that language barrier at the start and begin just getting to know them. How are you going to start? When you want to get to know them, how are you going to start? Hello? Yeah, little bit more expanded than that. When you want to get to know somebody, how do you start? Do you start, what's that? Eye contact. Yeah, yes, ask them questions. That's right. You show them first that you want to know about them, right? So you begin with focusing on them. Tell me about yourself. Tell me about your culture. Tell me about your language. You begin working in some of yours as well. What do you call this? And so on. You got to focus on them first, right? You've got to have an others focus. If you just walk up to them and you just start immediately telling them everything that's so great about your Ohio culture, they're probably not going to last very long, right? They're probably just going to move on. They're going to say, this person thinks that their culture is so much better than ours, and ours is nothing but dirt. They're not going to give you much more time. You have to show that you care and you value them. Anything else? I'm sorry? Yeah, something relatable. Yeah, and make a connection there then. Yeah, that's a great one. I think this is really valuable. It's a good exercise. That's why I wanted to pose the question to you, because I believe what God is saying here, what Jesus is saying to this church in Philadelphia, is that the same way that you would take a foreign culture like these Philadelphians took the Greek culture and language to those foreign regions, is the same way that you would take the gospel of Jesus Christ to those regions. To somebody that doesn't really fully understand it, who's never really experienced it, you're going to want to start by making connections and relationships and then show an interest in where they're coming from. And you're going to want to share your experience, right? The reality that you know, what's so good about it? Share what's good about it. Show them what's good about it. Don't just tell them about the wedding soup. Take them some wedding soup and let them experience it. And I believe this is the same method that Jesus would have us use. He says to this church here, he says, I put before you an open door, which no one can shut. He says, I want you to carry the culture. The culture of what? The culture of the kingdom of God. You see, we are all now ambassadors living in a foreign land because this world is not ours. This world is not our home. We look toward a heavenly kingdom, a heavenly world, and we are now citizens of heaven, and we're living now on earth as strangers, as aliens, the Bible calls it. And so our purpose in this life, in this world, is to be ambassadors, taking the culture of the kingdom of heaven to the kingdom of earth that needs it so badly. And the same way that these Philadelphians would take their Greek culture to Lydia, for instance, we should take the gospel of Jesus to the culture that we're in. The same way. How? Well, it starts with brotherly love. The city was founded on loyalty and on love, and that goes a long way to show somebody and win somebody to the value of a culture, doesn't it? Jesus said to his disciples the night before he was crucified, they will know that you are my disciples by your love for one another. So when they look at you interacting together, and the key there is not just any individual, you've got to be together. They've got to see us interacting together, and when they see that, they'll know that we belong to him. Why? Because the love that we exhibit, that we show, that we experience together, isn't the kind of love that anybody could ever find on earth without Jesus. There's a depth, a richness to it that can't be experienced apart from the presence of the Holy Spirit and the power of Christ in us. So that we can be loyal to one another, we can be forgiving beyond faults that we might have with one another. We can forgive and embrace and walk through the difficulties and the joys of life together all at the same time. And when others look at that and see that kind of reality in us, they're going to want that. Because they can't find that here in this culture, in this world. And it's so immensely more valuable and beautiful. They're going to want it. What else? I love this phrase in verse 10. Jesus says, because you have kept the word of... What's the word? Because you have kept the word of... Anybody got it? My perseverance. Whose perseverance? Mine. His perseverance. Not just any old perseverance, but his perseverance, right? The very same perseverance that Jesus had when he walked in this foreign culture. Because you have kept my perseverance. So think about what Jesus had to experience in this life. He was being an ambassador of God himself to a people that didn't really know him, and didn't know him well enough at least. And when he came down into our existence to teach us and show us about God, we rejected it. We fought back, we pushed back, and he had to keep persevering and showing that good example despite the rejection. We pushed back so much that we took him all the way to a cross, right? And even as he's hanging there, dying and bleeding, he's still modeling for us the kind of kingdom that we now belong to when he says, Father, forgive them. That's the kind of kingdom that we belong to. That doesn't return hate for hate, but returns love and forgiveness for hate. And Jesus modeled that all the way to the end, even his own death. And he says, I want you to show the same kind of perseverance. This church of Philadelphia, he says, if you keep my word of perseverance, if you keep modeling the way I model what the kingdom of heaven looks like on earth, then you'll have it. You'll have it. You know, I believe it's like this. It's an offense or an offensive approach rather than a defensive approach. You see, the defensive approach sits back and waits to see what the other side is going to do, and then they react, right? And the whole mentality, the whole mindset is, you're not going to score on me. I'm not going to give you an inch. You're not getting past me. And sometimes we carry the gospel of Jesus Christ with that defensive mindset. We shouldn't expect the world to live and act like we live and act. They haven't been changed by the gospel of Jesus Christ yet. But we see how they act and we want to respond with negativity against how they live and act. Jesus wants us to rather take the gospel in an offensive way. That's a positive way. That's not a way to say, I'm going to wait to see what you give me and then I'm going to react. It says, I'm going to overwhelm you. It's not, I'm not going to let you score. It's, I'm going to score on you. I'm going to overwhelm you with the love, with the grace, with the goodness, with the blessings, with everything that is beautiful about this kingdom that we belong to, everything that is beautiful about this Savior that we know. I'm going to show you that. I'm going to be proactive in it. I'm going to take that to you. And when we take that to the world, they're going to want that. You know it? Everybody wants to have a high-powered offense in college football, right? You watch those high-powered offenses, guys, and everybody loves the Oregon Ducks. Because they see the goodness and the value. And that's what Jesus is calling us to as well. An offensive approach. You know, this city of Philadelphia had some difficulties, though. In the year 17, while Jesus was still living and walking on this earth, there was a great earthquake that hit that region of Asia Minor. It flattened 12 cities. And Philadelphia was one of them. In fact, Philadelphia got the biggest brunt of that because they were closest to the fault line. And not only were they closest to the fault line, but because of where they were in relation to the fault line, this city experienced the earthquake that flattened the city, but then continued to experience aftershocks daily for, get this, years. Years. It created a kind of a brokenness in the mindset of the people. They were fearful. They were crazed over when is the next earthquake going to come? When is the next big one going to hit us? In fact, it was called a city of many earthquakes after that. A city full of earthquakes. And these constant recurring aftershocks drove the people out of the cities. Almost everybody lived outside the cities in huts. Because you saw the pictures of that city. Imagine walking down the street with those big marble columns, and then all of a sudden the earth starts shaking, and those marble columns are toppling over left and right. Nobody wants to be caught in that city, right? You're in your homes, and all of a sudden big gaping cracks show up. And remember the picture that showed the roof of one of those temples just dropped straight down on the foundation? You want to be underneath that block. And the people who did live in the city were considered mad, insane, because they were risking their lives every single day, and their days were spent with this, repairing this part of the city. One day this part of the city would be devastated, the next day this part of the city, and they just kept going around, repairing the cracks, building up what was torn down because of all these earthquakes. And there was kind of a schizophrenia or a mental break that happened because of that for these people. And Jesus says to the church here, if you'll hold firm and you'll walk through the open doors that I give to you, I will make you a pillar in the temple of God. And so to this city that knew full well what it meant for these pagan temples to have their pillars toppled, Jesus said, in the midst of all this hardship and all this difficulty, I'll make you a living temple, living pillars in the temple of God that cannot be toppled or shaken. And as they live that confidence, as they live that encouragement, because yes, this world is being shaken, but we don't belong to this world, we belong to another one. So we have a confidence and a strength that comes not from this world. And as they lived that, the city would see the solid foundations that they were built on, and they would long for that. It was an offensive approach. But there were some closed doors. Closed doors are from Jesus, just like the open doors are, because he says here, when I close a door, nobody can open it. And so because of that, we have to accept them in humble submission. What were some of the closed doors? Well, he says here in verse 9, I'm going to cause those of the synagogue of Satan. So it's a Jewish synagogue, but they're not really of God, they're of Satan, because they say they're Jews, but they're not Jews. They lie, because they've really rejected God. They've grabbed a hold of God's laws, but they've rejected him. Kept the laws, gotten rid of the lawgiver. So they don't really have the reason for the laws anymore. And he says, I'm going to cause this synagogue of Satan, I'm going to make them come and bow down at your feet, and I'll make them know that I've loved you. So eventually they're going to come and they're going to bow down to you. But in the meantime, this synagogue was serving as a blockade against the gospel going out. They were keeping this church from effectively ministering. And this church is coming up against this synagogue over and over and over again, and God says, don't worry about it. Eventually they will come and bow down, but that's not the time right now. That is a closed door for you. You are not going to carry the gospel by means of power and authority the way they do. You're going to carry the gospel by love. I love this phrase. It jumped out at me this week. It says, I will make them know that you were right all along and they were wrong. Is that what it says? No. This jumped out at me this week. This synagogue that's oppressing them so much that is a blockade to the ministry going forward, he says eventually they're going to come and bow down to you, but what I'm going to make them know is I'm going to make them know that I love you. But the God of the universe is behind you and is loving you. It doesn't say, I'm going to make them know that you were right and they were wrong. That will be part of it. It'll come with it, I think. But he's going to make them know his love for his people here. He's going to let this synagogue of Satan see the joy that he has in his church, the pleasure that he has for them, the strength and the help in the difficult times that he has for them. That's awesome. Now, we're not to take their ministry on. We're to do our own ministry, and they will then see the love that God has for us. Because you've kept this word. And so I'm going to keep you from the hour of testing. The hour is about to come upon the whole world to test those who dwell on the earth. Now, this hour of testing, he's not talking about keeping them from going through it. Because they did go through it. We know the church went through it. He's talking about keeping them while they go through it. And so this time of testing came upon them, and he kept the church strong throughout it because they were always looking for the open doors, and they were letting God walk them through those open doors. I'm going to keep you for this time of testing because you've kept my kind of perseverance. The hour that's going to come upon the world to test those who dwell on the earth. I love this. A lot of us, when we read, or when we think about Revelation, we think about all the death and the destruction and the plagues and the really difficult stuff that happens in the book of Revelation, right? And most of us usually, and you can raise your hand if you're with me on this, most of us usually think about that's the tribulation, the stuff that Satan's going to do to the world and to God's people in the end, right? But when you read Revelation, you find a different reality. It's mostly things that God actually does to the world and to those who don't follow him. Most of the difficult passages in Revelation are from the hand of God. Why? They're to bring an unbelieving, rebellious people back to him. And after message upon message upon message, those people sometimes still will not receive. And so the only way that they will hear is if he takes their self-sufficiency away. Is if he hits them where they're trying to live their own lives in the strength of their own power, and he takes that away. And in that time of testing, he can draw some back to him. And so it's an evangelistic testing. It's a difficulty based on the idea that he wants them all in the kingdom. He wants them all in the family. And so he's going to keep this church through that time of testing so that the world can realize this God loves these people. Because they're going through the same things we're going through, and yet they do it with a courage, with a faith, with a hope that's beyond this world. They show us something more beautiful and more amazing and wonderful than we've ever experienced in this world. And that's the open door that God has given to them. They're to walk through it. So they may be small. They may have few resources. They may have the Jewish people of the town and the religious authorities up against them, but God says, you've still got an open door for ministry. I think it might be very similar to what Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and Daniel had when they were taken into exile. They had to live in that foreign culture, and yet they stood firm. And they lived out their faith. And even the king was moved by that display. They tell us that we're living in a post-Christian culture. I don't think that's the case yet. But I know it's the case that we're living in a post-church culture. What do I mean by that? Well, still, the statistics are showing that in this country, 70-some% of people still claim a faith or belief in Jesus Christ and in the gospel. 70-some%. But the percentage that actually is involved and part of a church is about 11 to 12%. So the culture is still Christian, but yet not church. And so we're living in a post-church culture. There's still some Christian sentiment, but there's no reality behind that sentiment. You realize it doesn't matter what you think about God if it doesn't change how you live in this life. Satan knows that Jesus is the Son of God. He knows that he died on the cross to forgive us of our sins and to bring us into new life in him. He knows full well what the salvation of Jesus Christ means. He probably knows it better than we do, but it doesn't make a difference in his life. It hasn't changed his reality. Jesus is calling us to a faith in him that also changes our reality. And this is the open door that we walk through. We live out what it looks like to be the church of Jesus Christ in a world that's post-church. We don't expect them to act like we do because they haven't been changed by the gospel yet. But we live it with all we've got, and when they see it, they will want it. So what do we make of all this? You know, we need to reevaluate our Christian mission. This church was the missionary church, and we need to gain a missionary approach again. We need to go through the open doors and leave the closed doors alone. And part of that involves not going out and trying to make converts. You know, we're not supposed to make converts. The Bible never calls us to make converts. The Bible calls us to make disciples. Converts are what Jesus does. Disciples are what we're called to do. And here's part of the difference. When you're talking about a convert, you're talking about, I'm going to change their mind. I'm going to change their thinking. I'm going to do what only God really can do. I'm going to try and change them from the inside out. And disciples merely talk and live the walk of following God. And as you do that, you teach others. You take others along with you and you teach them what it means to walk after Jesus. And just like sharing that pot of wedding soup, you don't just tell them all about it, you share it with them. And as they share it, they grow to love it. And Jesus will make the converts. So we can let ourselves off the hook. We're not called to make converts, we're called to make disciples. And there's a door of ministry to making disciples that's open and available to us today. Last year, Heather and I and the kids started going down to YSU on Fridays during the school year, and every Friday from 2 to 4 at the YWCA, they have an international coffee hour. Do you realize that because of our school system is as bad as we might think it is, people from all over the world send their kids here to be educated? And you can go down there and you can meet with sometimes 40, 50, 60. There's hundreds of international students at Youngstown State. And we just go down and we talk to them. And the first day that we ever showed up there, we had this meaningful interaction with a couple of Muslim boys from Saudi Arabia. And we're going to keep going back. In fact, as a church, we're hosting it, I think, twice this fall. And so if you are feeling called to walk through these open doors and you're just wanting to know how to get started, I'm going to give you some options. If you want to take those options, tear off your flap and write on the back of your flap, write international if you're interested in coming with us and meeting international students and just showing them the love of Jesus. Did you know that through that event, I've discovered that there are actually organizations that bring high school kids from all around the world here to study in our schools. And then in the evenings when they're not at school and on the weekends, they go home to these boarding houses, these dorms, and they just stay there the whole time. And they're actually open and looking for families that would be willing to, foster or adopt, so to speak, these students while they're in. If you feel like maybe that's an opportunity, an open door that God might be leading you through, you mark that down on your flap. International. We'll get that. We'll get you in touch with that information. There's other kinds of opportunities. You know, the most effective way to spread the gospel is to plant churches. And that's because discipleship happens in churches. And if you plant churches, people will come to Christ. It's been proved out by the statistics. So God gave us that opportunity almost 3 years ago now to replant that church up in Streetsboro. Went there were 12 people sitting there, and now there are 60 to 70 in worship on a regular basis. And discipleship is happening there. And so now we're looking for the next site, the next area that we can go into, but it doesn't have to be a whole full-blown church. We're looking for just services, worship events that we can host. One of the dreams of mine is to have our people going out with the video of the sermon and the worship from Sunday morning and going out into businesses or homes or maybe the firehouse. You know, we've got a captive audience in our firehouses, and we started greasing the wheels there. We took coffee and donuts and pizza. That's right, coffee and pizza over to the firehouses, and the one on South Avenue so warmly welcomed us. I knew there's an option here. There's an opportunity here. There's a potential open door here. We're looking for people who'd be willing to just take the message and go out and watch it with them and then talk about it with them. There doesn't take much training or education at all to do that. You just have to share the experience that you're having with Jesus Christ. If you're interested in that, you just mark down worship ministry or church planting. Go ahead, you can mark it down if you want. If you're feeling led. God has given us an open door. It's not a difficult thing. It's not going to be something that's going to stretch us beyond our training or ability, because He's going to supply the training and the ability. He's given us an open door, and He said, if you will walk through that open door, if you'll keep my perseverance, well, then you will overcome. You know what's really exciting about this church at Philadelphia? About the middle of the first century, when Islam had risen to its ascendancy and they began pouring over the borders into Turkey. And they began just overrunning all of the Holy Roman Empire there in the east. Every city was falling to these invaders who were coming and putting people to the sword if they wouldn't convert. Philadelphia, the small city that it was with virtually no defenses, they were built on love and loyalty. Philadelphia survived through the onslaught. And even to this day, there's a bishop and a church, several thousand, that exist in that modern city that was once Philadelphia. And that, along with Smyrna, are the only two churches that exist out of all these seven. The ones that walk through the open doors that God calls us to are the ones that survive. God has got an open door to us. Will we walk through it?